Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Get ready, my bibliophiles. It is time to get booky with it. Welcome, one and all, to Books That Make You. I am your host, Desiree Duffy, and we are talking about books that make you remember what it was like to be a dreamer and maybe find bigger meaning in the process, like, finding God or something like that. Now, we all remember our experiences, especially in our younger days, of dreaming big, but then feeling disappointed when things didn't exactly go our way. Maybe you were a rebel who wanted to be a rock star, or you thought that you'd be playing pro baseball, or you wanted to be an astronaut, but then, boom, reality seems to somehow give us what we need rather than what we want, doesn't it? Our next guest decided to write a fictional memoir of a dreamer's journey in the book If God Allows. It's funny, it's wry, it's unapologetic, which we like, and its author is Robert P. Cohen. And he tells us the story of a high school dreamer. He's a rebel, and he's an advertising hack, an American atheist who sought a life worth writing about in a land where prayer and religion were only slightly more ubiquitous than sex, drugs, magic, and systematic corruption. This is a fish out of water story like no other. Robert is a writer and photographer. He lives in San Francisco, and he pays the bills by writing for advertising agency. That's his day job, and it's taken him around the world. He's done long stints working in Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam, Singapore, and Indonesia, which has provided some of the insights and inspiration that brought this novel, If God Allows, to life. Hi, Robert. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Desiree. Thank you so much. And what a wonderful introduction. That was highly entertaining.
Well, you, my friend, are highly entertaining, and you've written a highly entertaining book. I love the fact that you've taken this approach. It's a fictional memoir. And correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong, but the character sounds suspiciously like you. Is that right, or am I wrong?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I think that can be attributed to how lazy I am as a writer, and that I certainly borrow a lot from my life and from my own dreaming, so to speak. So that's been something people close to me have asked about, even some of the people who have read it who I don't know, who have written reviews or comments, have touched upon it, and I try not to ruin the fantasy of it too much, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't highly influenced by life events and things I've experienced. But at the same time, there's definitely a lot in there that is absolutely pure fiction, or you can call it just entertaining lying, depending how you want to look at it. But it's I always have fun, especially with people who do know me, watching them kind of squirm and guess about what parts are influenced by real life events and which parts are made up. And sometimes it's especially fun because it's almost backwards. The parts that seem made up are sometimes taken from true experiences, either of mine or things that I've overheard in bars and coffee shops around my time in Southeast Asia, and then some of the things that people actually think probably were true from my life are entirely made up. So it's fun. It was fun to write. It's fun to hear people, their take on reading about it, and then it's just fun to talk about in the aftermath, as far as people just waxing on their theories about all of the above.
It's one of those old sayings, too. Write what you know. And I dare challenge almost any writer, any author at any time in history who could say that they had not used their real life or their experiences and infused them into their characters.
Yeah, for sure. I have to imagine, right? And then, one of the funniest parts was deciding there were actually some true stories that I chose to leave out because I thought people might think they were too outlandish and too far a stretch. So,
yeah, isn't that the way it goes? The reality is often stranger and more bizarre than the fiction.
Exactly. I'm like, no, I can't put this in there. No one would think the character could have experienced something like that.
So tell us the story. Can you set it up? I explained it a little bit, but I think it's a bit more complex than the way I explained it. Tell us what the story is about. Give us the setting. Give us the characters.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, your overview is pretty good, but I'll say, the main character, Paul Goldberg, whose fictional memoir the story is, he is this guy who grew up a little bit of a black sheep in the town where he came from. He came from this area in New York where he was quite un-New York, if you will. And so he always fit in but didn't quite fit in. And a big theme that plays throughout is kind of playing on this grass is always greener thing. So whether he's there thinking about the things he wants to do, even, getting to when he first starts experimenting sexually, he's always imagining himself in a different situation or with someone else, to when he eventually makes it in his career and still imagining himself in another scenario or being somewhere else. So this guy is just never quite satisfied with where he is, and he ends up being quite a success in advertising and ends up having all these experiences that he's afforded through traveling for production, and so ends up on a lot of adventures and kind of gets a taste for that. But at the same time, he is a little bit greedy, so he's also chasing the dollar. And it gets him so far, but at some point he starts to remember some of his earlier dreams of his youth of wanting to be considered a real artist and feeling like he's really literally become a bit of a hack in his industry. And so at one point, ironically, through his ways of, doing what the client wants and not really pushing the creative boundaries, he kind of accidentally stumbles into an advertising creative success, and he starts getting all these job offers, and he starts finally getting all these big money offers that he wants. But he also happens to get an offer in Southeast Asia. And so there's a little bit of a conflict between that greed for the higher salary gigs and then this position that he just starts imagining will create all these opportunities to be the true artist he's always wanted to be, and that he thinks will provide the fodder to write the great American novel. And so that just sets off a kind of chain of events, and from there it becomes a little bit of a be careful what you wish for tale, where he certainly gets all the inspiration and ammunition he might need to create a tale worth telling, but at the same time that also becomes his demise and sets him down a path toward some pretty trifling situations, we'll just say, without giving away too many details.
And we have to have our characters in those trifling situations, right? That's what makes it juicy and fun.
Exactly.
And everybody loves a good fish out of water story, the idea of taking somebody and plopping them into an environment that they know nothing about so that they can find their way. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I'm sure in one way it's about just something we can all relate to, maybe to one degree or other. Everyone's been in that situation, and whether people have succeeded or failed in that, everyone kind of imagines thriving in that environment. But at the same time, there's some entertainment to it, even going back to a movie from our younger years, like Splash, you're just seeing the mermaid walk onto land and experience an electronics store for the first time and a big city for the first time. I don't know, maybe it's easy, but it's also endlessly entertaining, that whole idea of contrasting background and current situation.
Yeah, that's a great example, because we like seeing she literally was a fish out of water.
Exactly.
Coming into our world, it's like Starman. It's like if an alien comes to Earth. It's, there's so many great examples, and then we like it too when we see a character who is us, who is every person, very similar to your character, suddenly in an exotic or a different world as well.
Yeah. And when of the things that I experienced that I used as inspiration for this, when I first moved to Asia myself, and again, my time was actually mostly in Vietnam, but which is in so many ways much different than Indonesia, but other than actually being an entirely different nationality. It's just, for a Westerner coming from the U.S., it's just a cracking open of the head, as they say. Just, it's one thing. Yeah, I've met in New York or in L.A. or San Francisco, I've met people who have moved from the Midwest or the Deep South, and sure, it's a big culture shock, but I don't think that can compare to having lived your life in the West and going not just to travel, but to actually relocate professionally to the East. It's an experience like no other. And for me, every day was, it's like, if I don't laugh, I'll cry. So I may as well laugh. And I just knew right away. It was still years before I knew what exactly I was going to write. But when I first moved there, I knew that something was going to come out of it, and needed to, because it was just a point of view that a lot of people in the States and in the West might not get to appreciate. And I just felt like there had to be something in there to tell.
Sure. And you used your real experiences traveling, obviously. Did you also pull in your advertising skill set? Because within the advertising world, it is storytelling to a large degree. You're just doing it in a different way. Did you find yourself using your experience being in marketing and copywriting, advertising, as you were also writing the book?
That's a good question. As far as getting used to, especially in creative departments and advertising, we're always trying to just push beyond the obvious. So I think there's definitely a work ethic that came from that I don't know that I would have gotten just out of creative writing classes from college. You're taught to edit and to be very brutal in your editing, but there's something in the ad creative mindset about pushing for new ideas that, maybe in other fields and in other art forms, maybe people experience that differently. But for me, it definitely came from coming up in the advertising world and working with creative directors who were always pushing for better and more and funnier or whatever it may be. And that definitely weighed in, looking at some scenes, thinking, oh, is this funny enough? Does it entertain enough? Does it make me think enough? Or does it get whatever it is, the reaction I want out of this moment or scene or chapter? Just always pushing to make sure that I was getting the most out of that. So I think there was definitely some influence there.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, the thing, too, is good writers are writing for their audience, just like a good marketer wants to know that you want to have that reaction. You're going to push a button. You're going to make them laugh. You're going to make them cry. You know that the reaction in the audience, the person looking at the commercial or listening to the jingle, is the important thing. And that's a very good quality for writers to have. And sometimes writers take a while to figure that out. And it seems like you just intuitively knew that because of who you were.
Yeah, I think that certainly might have helped.
And you're creative in many, many ways. You also do photography, for example. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and that's a strange one, too. A lot of the art directors I've worked with always get a kick out of it, that I started as, because it's always, in advertising in general, the creatives always have some sort of creative side project. But for, stereotypically anyway, writers are always working on their novel or their screenplay, and it's always art directors who are working on their photography or painting or things like that. And, this was even before I started thinking I would write anything serious or significant, like a novel, for instance. I started taking night classes in photography, and that came about because of times when I would go through writer's block, and I would think, I need some sort of creative spark, some sort of creative outlet for times like that. And, I'd always been just kind of very casually interested in photography. It was something, as I traveled, I would like to take pictures where I traveled, but it wasn't anything serious. But, when I had this thought of having some sort of creative outlet to spark thoughts and spark those other parts of the brain when I was going through writer's block, that's what led me to photography. And the more I studied it and found some mentors in the field who really inspired me, it became a great passion, at least on par with writing. And it's great because they always kind of feed into one another in indirect and unexpected ways.
Let's talk about your audience for this book, because you must have thought of them when you were writing it. Is it for people who maybe are more spiritual, or people who are younger, people who are older? Who's your target audience?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I went through a lot of different rounds of thought on that, and I ultimately decided that I just had to write a book for myself. And, I thought about the types of books that I buy, and obviously other people are buying them. And there's definitely a range, but at the same time, I think if you came over and looked at my bookshelf, you'd probably narrow down some sort of theme with some outliers. I'm a huge fan of, the writers that are really pushing the limits and really are blurring those lines between fiction and reality. Even the books that are the furthest out there that I love are still things that probably could have happened to people in real life. There are some, I loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I'm definitely not a big sci-fi fan. I'm not really into thrillers and horrors and fantasy and things like that, even though, again, there are exceptions along the way that are just really, really great and might transcend the category. But a lot of the books that I really love that are at the top of my shelves are, of that gonzo nature where you're thinking, the writer obviously made some of this up, but I bet they lived a little bit of that too. And they're not worried about offending anyone. In fact, they're probably pushing to try to offend certain people. And so I just kind of thought about that. What would I want to read? And that hopefully there's an audience that might feel the same about that.
It feels a little eat, pray, love-ish. I don't know if you've heard that before. But just the idea of somebody saying, screw it, I'm going to go away, and you find yourself along the way. And it just harkens to that a bit for me.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that one before. I mean, I guess it's something I had considered, and even after the book was written, when I was thinking about how to market it, I did think about that book and kind of weighed back and forth whether fans of that would be interested. There's certainly the Bali overlap, even though I think she had quite a different experience in Bali than the character in this book. But yeah, as far as that, just kind of leaving everything behind and rolling the dice and going for it, there's definitely a lot of that overlaps.
And you're working on another novel that deals with mental health and racial issues. You want to touch on that?
Sure. There's it's definitely in very early stages, but it's something I've had in mind for a while. You know, this would be, I'm going to think positively and say when I finish it.
Good job.
It would still just be my second novel, so I'm still fairly new to this, but I already see a trend emerging, and this is how the first one started. I thought about it for a very long time before actually writing. Now and then I'd put some notes down, and then I think I rewrote the first maybe quarter of it over and over and over for quite a long time. And that's basically the phase I'm in with the new one. I've probably been writing 20 pages for a good half a year now, but it's just a matter of getting down the voice and the character. And while rewriting the beginning, I'm also thinking of where I want it to end up, kind of loosely outlining in my head and a little bit on paper. But the gist of it is about someone dealing with a fairly obscure mental health issue, and just kind of trying to get through life with that, while not quite being able to articulate how it affects him to the people around him, and just trying to navigate the things that he wants to do in life. And where the racial bit comes into it is that he ends up meeting a mentor in a pursuit that he's interested in, who happens to be a black gentleman, and they end up doing some work and traveling to some disenfranchised areas together. And so while this person is dealing with his mental health issue and all the things that affects him as it relates to him and to the environment around him, he's also kind of trying to write that with the things that the people he's encountering are going through, and feeling a little bit of guilt on top of everything, of how difficult his life feels while he's experiencing secondhand some of the difficulties that people are also experiencing. For instance, he ends up it's almost, I don't know if I should say this. Well, now I have to, but
yes, now you do.
It's almost like a little Forrest Gumpy in that he ends up in these moments of history, in our case, in quite modern history. So he ends up in Charleston around the time of the church shooting, and he ends up in Flint, Michigan around the time of the water crisis, and things like that. So, again, he's just dealing with his own issues, but then seeing firsthand people who are dealing with some real life issues and just having a really hard time kind of balancing his own problems with those of the people he's coming across.
I look forward to that. That sounds exciting. So tell everyone where they can find you and your books online and social media, website. Give us the details.
Sure. Well, if God allows, the book is certainly available on Amazon. For those who like to support independent bookstores, as I certainly encourage, if anyone has ever or hasn't heard of the website indiereader.com, you can go on there and they'll have a list of bookstores near you that are either carrying the book or can order it. And you can either go to that bookstore or you can even order the book online through that bookstore through indiereader.com. So I certainly always encourage that. Again, the name of the book is If God Allows by Robert P. Cohen. I am on Instagram, though that's where I share primarily my photography, but by all means feel free to check it out. That's Robert P. Cohen. And I'm on Twitter, though I don't do as much as I probably should there. That's also Robert P. Cohen. And then I have a Facebook author page, again, Robert P. Cohen author on there. And being on this podcast will be a good excuse to make a post there, as
yes,
my publicist would probably yell at me that I don't post as much as I should on that page. But this one will certainly be up there.
Oh, wonderful. Robert, it has been so fun having you on the show, sharing your writing and your story with us. You need to come back when you have that second book out, okay?
Thanks, Desiree. Oh, I'll be so excited to do so. And thanks, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Robert. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to the Books That Make You show. Once again, my name is Desiree Duffy, and I am your very bookish host. You can always find out more about us on our website. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. And we are on Facebook and Instagram. Don't forget, sign up for our newsletter because we give you all the news about books and authors, and we give away books and bookish prizes as well. Until next time, all of my bibliophile friends, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.